Hello everyone. Today we will see another topic from this chapter, that is integration and testing of embedded hardware and firmware. So once you have developed the embedded hardware and firmware, you go for integration and testing of this embedded hardware and firmware. So this embedded hardware and firmware, they are developed in different steps. The final embedded hardware, it constitutes of a PCB, that is a printed circuit board, with all necessary components affixed to it as per the original schematic diagram. So you will first have the schematic diagram, then you will have designed it and then developed it, and finally you will get the final embedded hardware. Then the embedded firmware, it represents the control algorithm, that is the program and the configuration data necessary to implement the product requirements on the product. The target embedded hardware without embedding the firmware is a dumb device and it cannot function properly. That means you can compare the hardware with your body and the firmware with your brain. Your body, it cannot function without the brain. Okay. So the hardware doesn't know what to do without the firmware, right? If you power up the hardware without embedding the firmware, the device may behave in an unpredicted manner, because we never know what happens if the hardware is powered up without the firmware. Both embedded hardware and firmware should be independently tested, that is called unit tested, to ensure their proper functioning. The functioning of individual hardware sections can be done by writing small utilities, that is small programs, which check the operation of the specified part. As far as the embedded firmware is concerned, its targeted functionalities can easily be checked or tested by the simulator environment provided by the embedded firmware development tools, IDE, that is the integrated development environment. Just like we have Kyle's Microvision to simulate your firmware. So coming to integration of hardware and firmware, it deals with the embedding of firmware into the target hardware board. It is a process of embedding intelligence to the product. So without firmware, hardware has no intelligence. Once you put firmware into the hardware, it will become an intelligent product. For non-OS based embedded products, if the processor or controller contains internal memory and the total size of the firmware is fitting into that code memory, then the code memory is downloaded into the target processor or controller. But if the processor or controller does not support built-in code memory, or the size of the firmware is exceeding the memory size supported by the processor or controller, then an external dedicated EEPROM or flash memory chip is used for holding the firmware. That means if there is some code memory, internal memory, and the size fits it, you can use that for the code memory. If it doesn't fit, you have to use an external memory. If it is there inside the chip, it is called on chip. If you are using outside or external memory, it is called off chip memory. So then that off chip, it has to be external chip, it has to be interfaced to the processor or controller. There are a variety of techniques which are used for embedding the firmware into the target board. We will see each one by one. The first one we have is out of circuit programming. As the name itself suggests, out of circuit programming means you have to remove that device or the microcontroller or processor out of the circuit for programming. So this is performed outside the target board. The processor or memory chip into which the firmware needs to be embedded is taken out of the target board, and it is programmed with the help of a device that is called a programming device. It is also called a device programmer or simply a programmer. So it is an example for device programmer. It's intelligent universal programmer. The name is LabTool 48UXP, wherein there will be a socket. If at all you want to program any device, you have to remove that microcontroller or microprocessor and place it into this and then program it. The programming device it's a dedicated unit which contains the necessary hardware circuit to generate the programming signals. So here you can see clearly how the socket will be. The programmer contains a ZIF socket. ZIF stands for zero insertion force socket. These sockets you have already seen in your LD lab, right? We place the ICs there. So without much force, without much effort, you can just place it by locking and unlocking these pins, right? The programming device will be under the control of a utility program running on a PC. There will be a software which is used for programming. Usually the programmer is interfaced to the PC through different interfaces like RS-232, that is serial interface, USB, or parallel port interface. The commands to control the programmer are sent from the utility program to the programmer through this interface. So this is a way we interface a device programmer with PC. So this is the PC which has got the utility program or the software for programmer. Then through the port, that is the serial port or USB port, you are connecting it to the programming device. This is the cable for connection, and here again to the port it is connected, and this is the programmer device into which you have to place the device and for the sake of programming. So normally there'll be a sequence of operations for embedding the firmware with the help of a programmer. So these are the steps followed. First, connect the programming device to the specified port of the PC. Okay, using whatever the cables for respective interface like USB, COM port or parallel port, you have to connect that device to the specified port of the PC. Then you have to power up the device. Ensure that the power indication LED is on. Okay, turn it on. Then execute the programming utility on the PC and ensure proper connectivity is established between the PC and the programmer. Okay, you start that software and ensure that the PC and the programmer is connected. In case of an error, turn the power off and try connecting it again. Then unlock the ZIF socket by turning the lock pin. There is a ZIF socket, there'll be a pin to unlock it. Unlock it first, then insert the device to be programmed into the open socket, then lock the ZIF socket. Then select the device name from the list of supported devices. In the utility program, you select the device from a big list of supported devices. Then you load the hex file which is to be embedded into the device. There will be a hex file. Once you program write the program and compile it or assemble it, you will get the hex file generated. That hex file has to be loaded. Then program the device by program option of utility program. Select the program option in the utility program and go for program. So once it is programming, you wait till the completion of the programming operation. There will be a busy LED which will be indicating. Once it is done, that busy LED will go off. That indicates the programming is complete. Once the programming is complete, you ensure that it is successful by checking the status LED on the programmer. That status LED, it will be green normally for success, red for error. Or you can also check the notification or the feedback from the utility program that it will show successfully completed, right? So that indication, you check for that indication to ensure that the programming is successful. So once the programming is successful, you can remove the device out of the programmer. Before that, you have to unlock the ZIF socket and take the device out of the programmer. So these are the steps, simple steps. Even a layman can understand these steps and go for programming. Once the firmware is successfully embedded into the device, then insert that device into the target board, then power up that target board and test it for the required functionalities. If you want the firmware to be protected against unwanted external access, and if there is a support for memory protection, then enable the memory protection on the utility before programming the device. Okay, the programmer usually erases the existing content of the chip before programming the chip, right? If there is some content on the chip, it will be erased. So normally EEPROM and flash memory chips can be erased by the programmer. But if there are some other chips like the older versions of embedded systems, they'll be built around UV-PROM, ultraviolet erasable PROM, right? So in that case, the programmer cannot erase it. You have to use another device called UV chip eraser. You have to place those chips into that eraser, erase the program first, and then go for programming. The drawbacks of this out-of-circuit programming is its high development time. Because it's a tedious procedure. Whenever the firmware is changed, the chip has to be taken out from the board for reprogramming. This is tedious and prone to chip damages due to frequent insertion and removal. If you keep inserting and removing it very often, the chip might get damaged. The programmer facilitates programming of only one chip at a time, and it is not suitable for batch production. So at a time you can program only one chip. But there is a variant of the programmer which is called a gang programmer, which has got multiple ZIF sockets, like 4 to 8 sockets, and you can program multiple devices at a time. With this, this can be resolved actually. But this gang programmer, it's a bit expensive thing compared to ordinary programmer. So this is the figure of a gang programmer, wherein there are 8 different sockets, where you can put 8 devices at a time and program it. But still 8 is a less number. You cannot go for mass production with this. One more important drawback is that once the product is deployed in the market in a production environment, it is very difficult to upgrade the firmware. Okay, to get the upgrades, it's very difficult because once it is in the target board, you cannot change the software, right? You have to remove it and then put it in a different device and then program it. So upgrading is a challenge in case of out-of-circuit programming. Where do we use this out-of-circuit programming? Normally, it is used for firmware integration for low-end embedded products, which runs without an operating system. okay, which runs without an operating system. It is commonly used for development of low volume products. That means where the products developed are lesser in quantity. We develop only some few quantities like 5 or 10 or less than 100 or something like that. And also for proof of concept product development. Proof of concept in the sense, before going for mass production, you develop one model piece, that is called the proof. Just like when you go for printing 1,000 quantities or something, first you print one quantity and check for errors and all. Similarly, while going for developing embedded products, if you want to go for mass production, one proof is developed, that is called proof of concept. In that case, we can go for out of circuit programming. The next technique for integration of embedded hardware and firmware is in system programming. Here again, as the name itself indicates, the programming is done within the system. That means the firmware is embedded into the targeted device without having to remove it from the target board. It's very flexible and easy way of firmware embedding. The only prerequisite or the requirement is that the target device must have a support for in-system programming. Apart from the target board, PC, ISP cable, and ISP utility, no other additional hardware is required for ISP. In case of out-of-circuit programming, we require an external or additional hardware called the programmer or the programming device. Here, no additional hardware is required for ISP. The target board, it can be interfaced to the utility program running on PC through different interfaces like serial port, parallel port, or USB. The communication between the target device and the ISP utility, it will be in a serial format. So normally the protocols used for ISP, it will be JTAG or serial peripheral interface or some other serial communication protocols. So in order to perform ISP operations, the target device should be powered up in a special ISP mode. Okay, so there is a special power up sequence actually for ISP power on mode. This allows the device to communicate with an external host. Normally that host will be the PC or the terminal through a special interface, through a serial interface. The device receives commands and data from the host, erases and reprograms code memory according to the received command. Once the ISP operations are completed, the device is reconfigured so that it will operate normally by applying a reset or a repower up. So normally, it will be turned on in ISP mode, then it will be programmed, then again it will be turned off and turned on, repowered to operate in normal mode. Devices with SPI in system programming. Normally ISP or in system programming is implemented with SPI protocol. It contains a built-in SPI interface, and the on-chip EEPROM or flash memory is programmed through this interface. So the primary IO lines involved in SPI in system programming, in SPI, it's a master-slave system. We have seen this in the third module. Different IO lines are MOSI, master out slave in, master in slave out, that is MISO, system clock, serial clock. Apart from this, you also have the reset for the target device and ground of the target device. The PC acts as the master and the target device, it acts as the slave in ISP. The program data is sent to the MOSI pin of the target device, and the device acknowledgement is originated from the MISO pin of the device. MOSI is the master out slave in, MISO is master in slave out. The serial clock SCK pin acts as the clock for the data transfer. Okay, since the target device, it works under a supply voltage less than 5 volts in TTL or CMOS logic, it is better to connect these lines of the target device with the parallel port of the PC. Okay, that is because the parallel port operations are also at the 5 volt logic, and there is no need for any other intermediate hardware for signal conversion. Like if you use RS-232 and all, you have to go for MAX-232 for signal conversion. But if you use parallel ports, there is no need of additional intermediate hardware. Okay. The standard SPI ISP utilities are freely available on the internet. Like our FlashMagic is one of them. It's an ISP utility, and there is no need for going to write your own program for programming utility. Okay. In ISP operations, the target device needs to be powered up in a predefined sequence. There has to be a sequence of operation to be followed, in order to perform this ISP. So one example of Atmel's 8089S series microcontroller is given here. The power up sequence for in-system programming for this particular microcontroller follows these steps. First step is you have to apply the supply voltage between VCC and ground pins of the chip. Then set the reset pin to high state. In order to go for programming mode, you have to set the reset pin to high state. If a crystal is not connected across the crystal pins, that is crystal 1 and crystal 2, then apply a clock 3 megahertz or 3 megahertz to 24 megahertz clock to the crystal 1 pin and wait for at least 10 milliseconds. Okay, this will be acting as the clock for the programming. Then enable serial programming by sending the programming enable serial instruction to a particular pin, that is P1.5 in this particular microcontroller. It will be connected to MOSI, master out serial in. The frequency of the shift clock supplied at the pin serial clock, that is P1.7, needs to be less than the CPU clock at crystal 1 divided by 40. So this protocol you have to follow. The code or data array is programmed 1 byte at a time by supplying the address and data together with the appropriate write instruction. The selected memory location is first erased before the new data is written. So that is what you do every time, right? Then the write cycle is self-time, and typically it takes less than 2.5 milliseconds at 5 volts. So this is the time for writing. Any memory location can be verified by using the read instruction, which returns the content at the selected address at serial output. P1.6 is connected to the serial output, that is master in serial master in slave out pin. Okay, P1.5 is master out slave in. P1.6 is master in slave out. After successfully programming the device, set the reset pin low. It was turned high initially. When you complete the program, set the reset pin low or turn off the chip power supply and turn it on again to commence the normal operation. Okay, so once you turn it on and repower it, turn it off and repower it, then it will go in the normal mode. Another concept you have to remember in ISP is the boot ROM. The key player behind ISP is a factory programmed memory called boot ROM. This boot ROM, it normally resides at the top end of code memory space, and it varies in the order of a few kilobytes. Top end in the sense, if the code memory space is say 64K, and if the boot ROM is say 1K, then the boot ROM occupies topmost 1K of the 64K. Okay, that means its end address will be FFFF. 64K means last address will be FFFF, right? So from FFFF till 1K, the last memory space of the code memory, that is occupied by boot ROM. It contains low-level instruction APIs, and these APIs allow the processor or controller to perform the flash memory programming, erasing, and reading operations. The contents of the boot ROM are provided by the chip manufacturer, and the same is masked into every device. So by default, the reset vector starts the code memory execution at 0000H, right? We have seen this in the while understanding the memory concept. By default, reset vector starts the code memory execution at 0000H. But if the ISP mode is enabled through special ISP power-up sequence, then the execution will start at the boot ROM vector location. Instead of starting at 0000, that is the initial address of the code memory, if in ISP mode, it will start the execution at last part of the code memory, last 1K or last part of the code memory, which is the boot ROM vector location. Okay, for that you should be in the ISP mode. So this technique of in-system programming, it is best advised programming technique for development work, since the effort required to reprogram the device in case of firmware modification is very little. If you want to go for reprogramming it, you don't have to remove that from the board. Wherever it is, you can program it there itself. Also, the firmware upgrades for the products supporting ISP is quite simple, right? You can upgrade it very easily wherever it is. You do not remove the device from the board. Next technique of integration of firmware and hardware is in application programming. In application programming, or IAP, it's a technique used by the firmware running on the target device for modifying a selected portion of the code memory. So what it means is you have already embedded the firmware into the hardware. You want to change some part of the code. That is called in application programming. So it is not a technique for the first time embedding of user written firmware. So you're not doing it for the first time. You already dumped the code using in-system programming. Then you want to change some part of the code, that then you can go for. That is called in-application programming. It modifies the program code memory under the control of the embedded application. So the examples for in-application programming are like updating calibration data, lookup tables, which are stored in the code memory. These can be treated as examples of in-application programming. So here, the boot ROM resident API instructions, which perform various functions like programming, erasing, and reading the flash memory during ISP mode, are made available to the end user written firmware for in-application programming. The firmware written by the end users, they will have access to the API instructions in the boot ROM. So it is possible for an end user application to perform operations on the flash memory. A common entry point to these API routines is provided for interfacing them to the end user's application. Okay, so normally it will be written as functions. The functions are performed by setting up specific registers as required by a specific operation and performing a call to the common entry point. So after you perform that function, like any other subroutine call, after completion of the function, the control will return to the end user's code. The boot ROM is shadowed with the user code memory in its address range. The address range will be common to boot ROM as well as the code memory. It will be shadowed in the sense at a time one of these will be chosen. This shadowing is controlled by a status bit. There will be a status bit to indicate whether to use the code memory for execution or the boot ROM. When the status bit is set, accesses to the internal code memory in this address range will be from boot ROM. If that status bit is set, then the access will be from boot ROM. If the status bit is cleared, then the access will be from user's code memory. So if you want to go for IAP operations, this bit should be set because you are going to use the boot ROM, right? Hence the user should set the status bit prior to calling the common entry point for IAP operations. So these are the different techniques we have seen, that is out of circuit, in system programming and in application programming. Apart from this, we can also go for factory program chip. It is possible to embed the firmware into the target processor or controller at the time of chip fabrication itself. So such chips are known as factory program chips. Once the firmware design is over and the firmware has achieved the operational stability, then the firmware files can be sent to the chip fabricator to embed it into the code memory. The manufacturer of the chip, they themselves can program the chips. The factory program chips are convenient for mass production applications. Suppose you want to produce thousands or lakhs of products, you can go for this factory program chips. It greatly reduces the product development time. But it is not recommended to use factory program chips for development purpose. If you are going for development purpose where the firmware undergoes frequent changes, then you cannot go for factory program chips. You can do it yourself instead of going for factory program chips. These factory program chips, they are a bit expensive because there is too much initial cost involved in this particular process. Okay. So then there is another concept, that is firmware loading for operating system based devices. So we have seen how things go for non-operating system based devices. In operating system based systems, we go for in-system programming for programming them. The OS based embedded systems, they contain a special piece of code called the bootloader. This bootloader, it will take control of the OS and application firmware embedding and copying of the OS image to the RAM of the system for execution. Okay, so that is done by this bootloader. The bootloader for such embedded systems, it comes as preloaded. It will be already inbuilt, or it can be loaded to the memory using the various interface supported like JTAG. This bootloader, it contains necessary driver for supported interfaces like UART, TCP/IP, etc. It has drivers. The bootloader, it implements menu options for selecting the source for OS image to load. Initially, you have to load the OS, right? From where it has to be loaded. That OS, OS image, it can be in flash ROM, or it can be in the network, or it can be through UART. So based on where it is present, you can select the option, and the bootloader will load the OS image from that particular place. In case of the network-based loading, the bootloader broadcasts the target's presence over the network, and the host machine on which the OS image resides can identify the target device by capturing this message. Once a communication link is established between the host and the target machine, the OS image can be directly downloaded to the flash memory of the target device. So in OS-based systems, you have to load the OS into the target device. So this is for this particular thing, you need the bootloader. That means bootloader will be initially loaded, and through this bootloader, the operating system will be loaded into the flash memory. Okay, so these are the things, these are the concepts we have seen in today's topic, that is the integration and testing of embedded firmware and hardware. We have seen out of circuit programming, in system programming, in application programming. Apart from this, we have also seen the concept of factory program chips and how firmware is loaded in the case of operating system based devices. So this is all about this topic. In the next class, in the next session, we will discuss the last topic in this chapter, that is embedded system development environment.